Boys and girls, an assembled company, especially those in the World Storytelling Cafe itself. Today we have zany stories from none other than Anthony Galvin Healy. Take it away, Tony.
Actually, the screen isn't frozen. If you were looking at that, that was just me messing. And I'd like to welcome the World Wide Web, but more particularly, I'd like to welcome the people who are here in the Storytelling Cafe in Marrakesh. It's a quiet day, it's Friday. I haven't really been in Marrakesh on a Friday. It's amazing how it empties. You can walk around the souks and not get hit by the scooters and everything. It's fantastic. But today I'm going to tell you stories. And I'm going to tell you stories from a number of sources. Some of the stories are from my native Ireland. I am Irish, you might guess that from the accent. I've been working on it 60 years and I finally mastered the accent. I sound like where I came from. So I'm going to be telling some stories from Ireland, and I might tell a story from closer to Marrakesh. We'll see how it goes. I'm going to tell short stories, long stories, silly stories, and stories with my own twist on them. But how do you get into stories? Well, it depends on what part of the world you're from. But if you're from Ireland, we have a strong oral storytelling tradition. And what that means in layman's terms is we get bored easily. And to try to keep ourselves occupied, we tell stories. And I first became aware of it from my grandfather. My grandfather, and this can be familiar to a lot of you, grandfathers tend to be old. They tend to be annoying, but we love them. That was my grandfather, an old man, an annoying man, but I loved him. And here's how he used to annoy me. He'd come in and I don't know what I'd be doing. Maybe I'd be watching television. And he'd say, "Oh, you're watching television. In my day, we didn't have a television to watch. We made our own entertainment." Or he might come in and I'd be reading a book and he'd say, "Oh, in my day, we didn't have a book. We had to make our own entertainment." Now, my grandfather was not that old and not that stupid. Of course, he knew what a book was. He had read them all his life. But this was his way. He had to give out about the new world. And one day I challenged him and I said, "Granddad, before you had television, before you had books, how did you entertain yourself?" He said, "I'm glad you asked. Here's what would happen. You'd finish the day's work. You'd eat the dinner. And then you'd sit down and the whole family would sit down and we'd turn and we'd look at the wall. And after a few minutes, somebody would say, 'There's never anything on that wall. Why are we paying a license for that wall at all?' And then somebody would say, 'Will we see, is there anything on the other wall?' We'd stand up and we'd move the seats around and we'd look at the other wall. And the funny thing is, there was never anything on the other wall either. And then somebody would say, 'Will we just switch off the wall and go to bed?' And we'd be getting up and we'd be about to switch off the wall when there'd be a gentle knock on the door. And you'd look outside and it was some neighbour with a fiddle. That was a bit of excitement. You'd let them in, they'd play the fiddle, we'd dance around the furniture for a few minutes. And after we'd finished dancing around the furniture, they'd go away and we'd sit down and we'd watch the wall again. And we'd be about to switch off the wall and go to bed when there'd be another knock on the door. And you'd look outside and it was a local child with a tin whistle, a penny flute. And you know what that sounds like. That sounds like somebody's got wire, cheese wire, and they're running it through your brain. It's a horrible sound, but you were so bored, you'd let them in. And they'd play the penny flute and we'd all dance around the furniture. And then they'd go and we'd switch walls again. A strange thing, there was never anything on this wall either. Then there'd be another knock on the door. You'd look out and it was some kid with a drum kit. Now, no matter how bored you were not going to allow a kid with a drum kit into the house. So you'd all sit there and pretend you were dead until he went away. Then finally, as we were going to bed, there'd be one last knock on the door and you'd look out. And it was somebody with no penny whistle, no fiddle, and no drum kit. And you knew who that was. That was the storyteller. You were always delighted to see the storyteller, because once the storyteller came, the evening began. So you'd let the storyteller in. And my grandfather, You know the way old people are always giving out about too many buttons on the remote control. My grandfather could never work out the remote control, but he said with the storyteller, it was so easy to work out the remote control. You just sat the storyteller down on the chair, you gave him or her a glass of whiskey, and they started. They kept going until the whiskey was gone. If you wanted a second story, just top up the glass. And that was how a storyteller worked. And he said that's how they made their own entertainment. And in Ireland, we're famous for stories, writers and stories. That seems to be about all we can do. We can't play football. We can play music, but nobody wants to listen to it. It's stories we're known for. And today I'm going to tell you some stories that come from Ireland. Where did the stories come from? Well, they come from a couple of sources. There are people whose job is to collect folklore. They're like big game hunters, only they're not hunting animals. They're not using a gun, they're hunting stories, and they're using a little phone to record the stories. And it's very easy. You find an old man, and you hold the phone up to him. You say, old man, tell me a story. And old people love telling stories, and it's brilliant. They just tell you the story. And the people who are professional folklorists, they record the story. It goes in the National Archives. It's written down, that goes in the National Archives. And someone like me can come along, find the story, and tell it to people like you. There's another way, though. Sometimes you meet an old person who doesn't want to tell you a story. Omar, you're now a grumpy old man who does not want to tell me a story. Tell me a story. No. How do you overcome that problem? You learn how to torture old people. And it's very easy to torture an old person. All you do is threaten to turn down the heating. Old people absolutely hate a cold room. So you just say, old man, tell me a story. Yes. Good. You see? Just threaten to turn down the heating, you collect the stories. And they all go in the National Archives. In Ireland, they're up in Dublin. And different parts of the world, your archives are in different places. But that's where the stories are held. Then sometimes you'll go along and listen to a storyteller. You'll remember the story, and that preserves the tradition as well. Now, when you come to tell stories, like I'm going to tell stories to you, when you come to tell stories, you have two choices. Choice number one, preserve the tradition. Tell the story exactly the way you always heard it. And that's good. But we don't live in a museum. Choice number two, put your own spin on the story. And today, I'm going to tell you some stories that I heard from old storytellers. I'm going to tell you some stories I robbed from the National Archives. Well, they're public domain, so I didn't really rob them. But my mentality was right. I would have robbed them if I could have. And some of the stories I'm going to make up. And it's a sort of a mental challenge. You can try to figure out which is which. I'd like to tell you in the beginning a story about a friend of mine who's a bit of an idiot, or as we'd say in Ireland, a complete idiot. Now, every group of friends has somebody who's a little bit soft between the ears. If you look at your group of friends and you do not know who this person is, it's you. And among my group of friends, I know it's not me because it's Larry. We call him Larry the Loon. Now, Larry the Loon, he's not a bit soft in the head, he's very soft in the head. And he's always doing stupid things, but he's our friends, we love him, we include him in everything. But you have to be careful. I met Larry just before Christmas. A couple of months ago, he had a big smile on his face like he had swallowed a banana sideways. And I said, Larry, you're looking happy. He said, Anthony, I'm feeling happy. Somebody gave me €100. Oh, that's good, said I. Not so good, said Larry. It's not my money. I have to give it to somebody else. Oh, that's bad, said I. Not so bad, said Larry. I have to give it to a friend. And don't we all love giving money to our friends? Oh, that's good, said I. Not so good, said Larry. You know me and my old head. I don't always remember things, and I'm worried I might forget to give it to my friend. Oh, that's bad, said I. Not so bad, said Larry. I've come up with the perfect plan. That's good, said I. What's the plan? And he told me. He said, you know the way I love eating sandwiches? I said, yes, Larry, we all know that. You always have a sandwich someplace about you. He said, I remembered I had a ham and cheese sandwich in my pocket. And I took out the ham and cheese sandwich and I opened it up and I separated the slice of ham and the slice of cheese. And I took out the €100 and I laid the €100 carefully on the slice of ham. Then I got some mustard, and I spread the mustard over the money to keep it in place. Then I dropped the cheese back on, and then I dropped the bread back on top. Sandwich perfectly preserved, and the money absolutely safe. And then I put the sandwich back in my pocket. That's good, said I, but I wasn't quite sure in my head. That's good, said I. Not so good, said Larry. Didn't all that hard work make me hungry? Oh, that's bad, said I. Not so bad, said Larry. Didn't I remember I had a ham and cheese sandwich in my pocket? That's good, said I. Not so good, said Larry. I took out the ham and cheese sandwich and I ate it. And I ate the money as well. That's bad, said I. Not so bad, said Larry. Do you remember I told you it wasn't my money? It was your money. That's my friend Larry. He ate my Christmas present. But you know, when you have a friend like that, you make accommodations, you make allowances. And a couple of weeks ago, we decided we'd go fishing. There's a river runs behind my house, and there's a pike in it. And they're not really tasty to eat. They're big animals, and this one was meant to be this length. And of course, if you talk to a fisherman, he wasn't this length, he was this length. And if you talk to another fisherman, he went from here to here. Everyone was talking about this pike, and we decided we would go fishing for him. And the best time to go fishing was at night. So we all agreed we'd meet at 9 o'clock, just as dusk had settled. And of course, Larry was coming along with us. And I decided to give Larry the simplest job that not even Larry could make a mistake on. So I said, Larry, here is your job. What I want you to do is just bring a flask. And Larry looked at me and I said, a flask, Larry, a flask. You hold liquids in it. He said, oh, I got you. And he wrote it down on a sandwich so he wouldn't forget. Well, the night came. We got to the river. We saw Larry coming across the field towards us, and he had a bag. And I thought, oh, good, he's remembered. And he arrived, and he looked at me, and he said, you thought I'd forget. I said, I did think you'd forget, in fairness. And he put down the bag, and he reached in, and he took out not a flask, but a jug. And I looked at him, and I said, Larry, that's a jug. He said, jug, flask, what's the difference? I said, for one thing, a jug won't keep the coffee hot. And he looked at me and he said, what coffee? That's when I knew it was going to be a long night. He had brought an empty jug. Anyway, there was nothing we could do, so we went fishing. We all sat down by the river and we all cast our lines and we all waited. We all got cold and we all got bored and we all got tired and we all got thirsty. Except for the pike, who kept his head down and we didn't see a sight of him. Eventually, after 2 or 3 hours, I was shivering and I said, do you know what I'd love? I'd love a hot cup of coffee. And my next friend said, do you know what I'd love? I'd love a hot cup of coffee. And the next guy said, I'd love a hot cup of coffee. And so did the next guy. And so did the last guy. And Larry said, do you know what? I'd love a hot cup of coffee too. Isn't it a shame nobody remembered? We all glared at him and he said, oh yeah, that was me. Yes, Larry was the one who had forgotten the coffee. And then one of my friends said, there's a 24-hour garage just down the road. If one of us goes, they can come back with 6 mugs of coffee. Brilliant plan. Larry said, who's going to do it? And we looked at him, we said, Larry, you're going to do it. He said, oh yeah, I suppose that's fair enough. He said, what am I going to bring the coffee back in? I said, in the stupid jug. Yes, grab the stupid jug. Waved to us, set off through the fog across the field. And as he was walking, he heard a little splash and he turned around. And there was the pike leaping in the distance. Do you think he'd tell us? No, if he told us, we could have all caught the pike and gone home. No, Larry just looked, then turned around. And as he turned around, not looking what he was doing, the side of the glass jug hit off the side of a tree and shattered. A shower of shards of glass fell on the ground. Larry crunched across the shards of glass and walked on oblivious. He reached the garage. He walked into the garage. He said to the man behind the counter, he said, "Hello there, fatso." The man said, "I'm over here. You're looking in the mirror." Sorry about that. 6 cups of coffee, please. And the man looked at him and said, "How are you going to bring the 6 cups of coffee away?" Larry said, "In this jug." Ooh. I thought I'd brought a jug with me. It seems I only brought the handle. Then Larry had the first thought to ever cross his tiny little mind. He remembered he was wearing a hat. And he said, "We will use the hat." And he poured the first cup in, and the second, and the third, and the fourth, and the fifth, and the hat was full. Now, a sensible person might have drank their own cup of coffee and walked back with the hat. A different sort of a sensible person might have carried the hat in one hand and the extra cup in the other hand and walked back to us. Not Larry. Larry had the second thought to ever cross his tiny little mind. He looked at the hat, and then he remembered every hat in the world has a little dip on the other side. There's a gentleman here in the audience wearing a hat. You can confirm there is a dip on the other side. Larry remembered, and he said, And he picked up the hat, turned it upside down, and poured the last cup into the dip. Walked back like this so carefully. Arrived at the riverbank and set the hat down in front of us and passed around 6 straws. And I looked at the tiny little puddle of brown in the middle of the hat, and I said, "Larry, there are 6 of us." Larry looked at me and said, "Do you think I'm a complete idiot? There's 1 cup there, and there's ooh. What happened there?" And poor Larry put the wet hat on his head. We didn't get the coffee, and the only thing caught that night was Larry caught a cold. So unfortunately, that's the sort of friends I have. But I'd like to tell you something that happened, not to a friend of mine, but to a neighbor of mine. We call him Tommy the Tapper. Now, for those of you that are not Irish, you will wonder what a tapper is. A tapper is someone who's always tapping you for money. He regards humans as a sort of walking ATM machine. How are you doing, my friend? I haven't seen you in a long time. You hungry? We go and get a pizza. You'll pay. I'll pay you back next week. Look at you. You're looking well. You're looking 10 years younger than the last time I saw you. Do you want a pint? We go and have a pint. You buy. Look at you. Because you're only €10. I'll give it back to you next week. That was Tommy the Tapper. Everyone was a source of money. Are you looking well? I mean, what age are you now? 18? You don't even look that. You don't have a 10 worth of bottle. That was the way Tommy was. Look at you. You buy the wrong this time. I buy the wrong next time I meet you. That was Tommy. Always tapping us for money. The one thing he loved more than tapping people for money was not paying the money back. You'd never see the money again. Go out of your pocket, disappear into Larry's, and that was the end of it. It was like a black hole. Well, that was Tommy the Tapper. You know the thing about Tommy? Tommy, the one thing he loved more than not giving money back to people was cheese and onion crisps. Strange man. He absolutely loved cheese and onion crisps. He had a thing for them. Anyway, before I tell you the story, I need to ask you one thing. Have any of you heard of the legendary Irish creatures, leprechauns? For our Moroccan friends, a leprechaun is like a small, angry djinn. Except he doesn't live in a lamp. He lives in a hill. He comes out late at night. He's very good at making shoes, very bad at making clothes. He's small, he's angry, he's got a flaming red beard and flaming red hair. And what color does a leprechaun dress? Green. Actually, no, that's an American tourist on St. Patrick's Day. A real leprechaun, as I said, very bad at making clothes, very good at making shoes. A real leprechaun steals clothes. And being small, he has to steal children's clothes. Now, hundreds of years ago, they went to the homes of the gentry and they stole beautiful tailored jackets with tails, often green, and they had little hats. And they had the pants that came down to the knees and the silk stockings, and they looked splendid. Today, a leprechaun is going to break into your house, steal from your clothesline. What's he going to get? That's not the way we dress anymore. He's going to get your child's school uniform or their Paw Patrol pajamas. And leprechauns do not like school uniforms. So what you need to look out for is a small, angry, red-headed kid in Paw Patrol pajamas, someplace where the kid should not be in Paw Patrol pajamas, like by a lonely river late at night or up a mountain. And if you see that kid with the Paw Patrol pajamas and the bright red hair, and if that kid turns around and he has a big flaming red beard, like your beard, only a different color, if you see that, it might be a leprechaun. If you look down and he has the best shoes you have ever seen, he is a leprechaun, and you're in trouble, because leprechauns are nasty, vindictive, sneaky. Anyway, I need to tell you that, and I also need to tell you that every parish, every townland in Ireland has a legend. Oh, you see that lump over there? That's the fairy fort. That's the fairy hill. They live under that mound. The truth, I always thought, was that farmers were just too lazy to level the land. And the farmer would come in and his wife would say, "Did you clear out the land in the top field?" "Ah, no, there was a fairy fort." Just an excuse not to do the work. That's what I believed. Until one night, last August, I was walking home. It was July. Last July, I was walking home, and whatever way I looked, there was a shadow at the side of the hill where we said the fairies lived. And there had never been a shadow at the side of the hill before. Now, when you see a shadow at the side of a hill where there never was a shadow before, what should you do? Here's what you should do. You should put your hat down low, you should turn away, and you should walk home without looking. It's none of your business. You do not want to upset the leprechauns. That's exactly what I did. I got home, I locked all my windows, and I locked the door, and I went to bed. Now, the next person out of the pub was Tommy the Tapper. He'd obviously tapped everyone in the pub for a pint, and he was finished. Nobody was going to buy him any more drink. He was walking home. And as he was walking home, he spotted the fairy mound and he saw the shadow at the side of the hill where there never had been a shadow before. And he did not have the sense to pull his hat down low and walk on. He walked towards the hill. And when he got there, he discovered that the shadow at the side of the hill was actually an opening. The only thing protecting the opening from the elements was a thick curtain of cobwebs. And he reached his hand in and he pulled the cobwebs apart. And he reached one leg in. He reached the other leg in. And he got one elbow in. And he got the other elbow in. And finally, he pulled his bottom in. And the curtain closed behind him. Tommy was inside in the fairy hill. And he walked down a narrow passageway. And at the end of the passageway, he saw this weird orange glow. And when he finally got there, he discovered what it was. It was a small little alcove. There was a single candle. The light from the single candle was glittering off 12 bags of gold. Tommy rubbed his hands together. He thought, I've hit the big time now. I'm tapping a leprechaun. And we all know leprechauns have loads of money. And he went to grab the money, and then he thought, wait a second. Leprechauns are mean, nasty, and vindictive. I think I told you that a minute ago. Mean, nasty, and vindictive. And if you have a leprechaun on your back, your life will be miserable. So he thought, I'd better not. Then he thought, I'll steal just one bag. He'll never notice one. Then he put the bag down and thought for a minute. You see, in Ireland, we talk about leprechauns a lot, but we don't actually meet the leprechauns that often. And none of us know their level of education. Maybe the leprechaun can count. And if the leprechaun can count, he'll notice a missing bag of gold. So finally, Tommy came up with the perfect plan. Instead of stealing the leprechaun's gold, all he would do would be he would remove one coin from the top of each bag. Big, heavy gold coins. He took 12 of them. The leprechaun would never notice the 12 coins. So Tommy filled his pockets and he turned, and he was walking up the passage towards the cobwebs, and he thought, do you know what? One thing is even more fun than tapping people for money. It's stealing money. And he went back down to the alcove and he took one more coin from each bag, dropped them in his pockets, and he came up and he thought, you know what? That's almost as nice as cheese and onion crisps. And he went back. He stole one more coin from each bag. And he went up and down that passageway 12 times. 144 big, heavy gold coins in his pockets. He went back down the 13th time. And the only thing that stopped him was when he picked up the last coin and dropped it in his pocket. The weight was so much his belt burst and his pants fell down to his ankles. Now Tommy picked up his pants, got them up about as far as here, and staggered out of the hills and walked home in the moonlight. And that night there were 2 full moons in my parish, one up there, one down there. Now, we knew nothing about this. The only thing we noticed was, over the next week or so, Tommy stopped tapping us for money, so we were all happy. And then we noticed the local shop ran out of cheese and onion crisps. And then we noticed the delivery trucks arriving at Tommy's house, big boxes of cheese and onion crisps. And we noticed Tommy getting bigger and fatter and fatter and fatter and fatter. And his face getting white, grey and pasty looking. I said to him one day, I said, Tommy, you're not looking well. He said, that's a surprise, Anthony. I should be looking great. Did you hear I'm a vegan now? I said, what do you mean you're a vegan? He said, all I eat is cheese and onion crisps, and they're vegetables. I said, I don't think that's how being a vegan works. What can I say? He was an adult. It was his choice. So he kept getting fatter and fatter, and then one day he didn't appear in the village at all, because he couldn't get out of bed. And I knocked on his door one day, wellness check. I said, are you all right, Tommy? And normally when you'd knock on Tommy's door, you'd get a friendly reply, get lost, don't come in. Because Tommy wouldn't let you in case you might want a glass of water or something. He wouldn't even spend that much on you. But instead I said, I'm not well. I said, Tommy, you need to see a doctor and you need to work on your diet. He said, no. He said, do you know what I need? I probably need a few more vegetables. And then I heard the pack of cheese and onion crisps opening. So, an adult, what can you do? You have to let them make their own choices. September came, and September brings the children back to school. Of course, when the children come back to school, they're stuck inside in the classroom for a few hours, and the mischief is building up in them. And on their way home, what do? They knock on doors and run. In my part of the world, we called it knock and run. Apparently, the kids today call it ding dong dash. Doesn't matter. The real word for it is annoying. They knock on the door, you open the door, they're gone. Tommy heard a knock on his door. He knew what it was. He said, kids, get lost. The knock was repeated. He said, get lost. The knock was repeated. He said, I'm going to drag myself out of the bed and I'll teach you to get lost. He dragged himself out of the bed. He was crossing the room, and the knocks turned to kicks. Whoever was outside really wanted that door open. Tommy got to the door and he flung the door open and he got ready to shout at the child. There was no child. Thought he must have gone that way. No, he must have gone that. No. He said, stupid children. He slammed the door. He turned around, and there on the chair by his bed was the stupid child. Bright red hair, Paw Patrol pajamas. Tommy felt a slight flutter in his heart. But he was not letting on. He looked at the kid and said, kid, scat, I'm not well. The kid turned around and the kid had a bright red beard. That's when Tommy knew the leprechaun had found him. But Tommy wouldn't say anything. Tommy wouldn't admit he'd been found. He walked over to the bed, pulled the bedclothes up, and said, get lost, I'm not well. And then he turned so that he wasn't facing the leprechaun, and the leprechaun heard the rustle of a crisp bag opening under the bedclothes. And the leprechaun said, "Oh, that sounds like a nice idea." And the leprechaun grabbed a bag of crisps and began eating them, said, "These are nicer than I thought." And when he finished eating the crisps, he tossed the wrapper on Tommy's bed. Tommy said, "They're my crisps." "Very nice crisps they are too," said the leprechaun, and he had another bag and tossed the wrapper on Tommy's bed. And for the next 3 hours, the leprechaun stayed there, eating crisps, throwing the wrappers on Tommy's bed. Eat the crisps, throw the wrapper, eat the crisps, throw the wrapper. The pile of wrappers was building and building over Tommy. Finally, a little after 6, Tommy opened his eyes and pulled down the bedclothes and said, "It's a shame I'm not well. If I was well, I'd get out of bed, I'd hop you off the 4 walls, and I'd throw you out the window." Tommy wasn't the most hospitable. Well, the leprechaun smiled at him and said, "Don't worry, Tommy, you won't be sick for long." And on hearing that, Tommy's spirits revived. And Tommy smiled. And he had another bag of crisps, and the leprechaun had another 7 or 8 bags of crisps, and followed it with another 7 or 8, and kept throwing the wrappers on Tommy's bed, and the pile kept growing. And finally, around 8, Tommy pulled the bedclothes down again, and he looked at the leprechaun. He said, "I thought you said I was going to get well." "Oh, no," said the leprechaun. "I never said you were going to get well. I said you wouldn't be sick for long, and you won't be, because as soon as the moon rises, you will." Tommy jumped a bit. 9 minutes past 9, the moon rose over the windowsill. The moonbeam crossed into the room. Tommy did not die. Tommy looked at the leprechaun and said, "I'm still alive." And the leprechaun looked at him and said, "Patience, young man." Well, over the next 2 hours, they watched the moonbeam cross the floor, come up over the leg of the bed, come over the huge mound of crisp wrappers that had built over Tommy's body. At 11 o'clock, the moonbeam hit Tommy's neck, and over the next few minutes, it rose over his cheek. At 11 minutes past 11, the moonbeam hit Tommy's eye. Tommy died. The poor leprechaun just smiled, went to pick up all his money. And then he thought, "You know what I like? I like those cheese and onion crisps. I might go back and have another bag." He finished every bag in the room, tossed the wrappers on Tommy's bed, and then he picked up his money and thought, "I better search the rest of the house just in case." He went into the kitchen. The washing machine was full of crisps. He went into the bathroom. The bathtub was full of crisps. He went up to the attic, full of crisps. He ate every last crisp. Finally, at a minute before dawn, he threw the last wrapper on top of Tommy's bed. He belched so loud he cracked the window pane. He picked up his gold. He turned and he disappeared. And the only thing we knew was the shadow at the side of the hill, where there never had been a shadow before, closed up that night. We never saw it again. And we never saw Tommy again either. And so friends were saying to me, coming up to October, they said, "Have you seen Tommy?" And I said, "No, I better go and check." And I knocked on the door and nobody told me to get lost. So I forced the door open. The kitchen was spotless. The bathroom was spotless. Finally, I came to the bedroom. I turned the handle and I pushed. And something was resisting me, so I put my shoulder into it and really pushed. And then I got knocked on my behind by an avalanche of crisp wrappers. And I forced myself through the crisp wrappers until my thighs hit the side of the bed. And then I reached down through the crisp wrappers, felt around. I felt something soft and squishy. Tommy's eyeball. And as I pulled my hand up, all the crisp wrappers fell off, revealing his body there like the parting of the Red Sea. And there he was, bloated, his eyes looking up at me, the dead eyes. And a little spider ran out of his nose and in his mouth. And I screamed and I ran out of there. And let me tell you, from that day to this, I have not touched a cheese and onion crisp. Let me also warn you, If you see a bright, red-headed kid ahead of you in the souk here, wearing Paw Patrol pajamas, be very careful. And if that kid has a bright red beard and best shoes in Marrakesh, it's a leprechaun on holidays, and make sure you give them their space and avoid them because they are mean, vindictive, and vengeful. So, guys, I hope that's a warning to you. I'd like to tell you now a story that comes from nearer this part of the world. There's only a small amount of us, so I might make this my final story and then let Omar tell a story because he is the resident storyteller here in this part of the world. What are they saying there? Oh, I have subtitles. That's great. In case I forget what I'm saying, the subtitles behind us will tell me. I didn't realize we had that sort of technology. That's amazing. So, guys, if anyone needs to disappear at this stage, feel free to. Okay. And, guys, I would love to thank this Dutch family for giving me so much of their time. Have a wonderful time here in Marrakesh. And now I'm going to tell the rest of the world a story, as I said, from a little bit nearer Marrakesh. From a city called Baghdad. And it's not a new story, it's quite an old story. Here's the thing, when you're a storyteller, you have a choice of stories. You can tell the newest story in the world. You can tell the oldest story in the world. You can tell the shortest story in the world. You can tell the longest story in the world. We tried to tell the longest story in the world here at the World Storytelling Festival in 2025. 25, where we told stories for roughly 80 hours. I am not going to keep you here for 80 hours. I have too much respect for you and too much respect for my throat. I thought I'd tell you the world's shortest story instead. The world's shortest story. Once upon a time, they all lived happily ever after. It's short, but I think you'd agree with me, it's lacking a bit in terms of plot. Then I thought, tell you the world's newest story, but I haven't come up with it yet. We're always coming up with new stories. And then I thought the world's oldest story. And this story happened about 3,500 years ago in ancient Baghdad. And when I was growing up, I used to love the tales of the Arabian Nights. Sinbad the Sailor, I think he was part of the Arabian Nights. I know Aladdin was, Ali Baba and the 40 Thieves, they were all in there. And I had visions of floating around the world on my own flying carpet. Imagine my disappointment when I came to the souks here in Marrakesh and the carpets just lie on the ground and do nothing. You can see a lamp behind me. You can rub that lamp till your hand goes red and raw and no gin is going to come out of it. Unfortunately, the visions of our childhood don't really materialize into reality, but one of the stories I loved was about the king, the sultan, the emir, his favorite jester. Now, his favorite jester was a character called Backback. Backback was both the court jester and the sort of local clown and funny guy. You know the way every community has a clown or a funny guy, and Backback was the clown. And it's a good job he was a clown because he wasn't the handsomest guy in the world. He was kind of small and humpy, and he had a little hunchback, and he walked crooked, but he could do amazing things. He could stand on his hands, he could juggle, he could dance like nobody else. He had a beautiful singing voice, but jokes were his big thing. He could make anyone laugh. And his biggest gag, or bit of business, as we might say today, was this. Somebody would say, Backback, because that was his name, and he'd back. And everyone burst out laughing, Backback. Okay, the sense of humor was not very sophisticated in Baghdad, but it was 3,500 years ago, so give him a break. So Backback, anyway, he used to love performing for the king, the royalty, the sultan. He used to love that courtly world, but he also loved performing for the ordinary people in the town square. And he would take off his turban and leave it on the ground, and he'd perform, and the coins would be tossed in. And that's how he made his living, and he made a good living, and everyone loved him, but none more than the sultan. Well, one day, Backback decided it was time to get his fix of performing. So he went to the town square, he called a crowd, and he began his weird dance, and then he began his juggling, and he began telling his jokes, and the crowd would say, Backback! And he'd back, and they'd erupt in laughter. Unlike you people who I hope are more sophisticated than that. Anyway, that was Back. He was performing. He finished his performance. And there was a guy there called Taylor the Tailor. Sorry, that was his brother, Tyler the Tailor. Tyler the Tailor was the best tailor in all of Baghdad. He knew he was the best. Everyone knew he was best. Everyone except the Sultan. He could never catch a break and make a suit of clothes for the Sultan. And he thought if he could make a suit of clothes for the Sultan, everyone in Baghdad would know he was the king of the markets. And he was the best tailor there. If you don't know Tyler the Tailor, you may be familiar with his brother, Taylor the Tailor, who was the best roofer in Baghdad, but this story doesn't concern him, so he will not be mentioned again. Anyway, the tailor, at the end of Back's performance, decided, if I make friends with the king's jester, I'll be able to get him to look at my clothes. I will finally be the Sultan's personal tailor, and everyone will acknowledge that I am the greatest. So he walked up to Back and he said, Back. And Back. And they both laughed. And they said, well, seriously, he said, are you hungry? Will you come home and eat dinner with us? And Back said, is your wife a good cook? She's the best in Baghdad. Back, who loved a free meal, as most performers do, decided he'd come home with them. And he went home and they had a wonderful meal. They were all sitting around the table and Back was telling the odd joke and stuffing his face. Now, like most entertainers, you grab your nearest meal and you don't let it go in case you don't get the next one. He was stuffing his face. He picked up the soup bowl and he slumped the soup. And eventually, at one point, and everyone thought it was hilarious. And they laughed. And he went, and everyone thought it was so funny. And he went, and they laughed. And their sides were splitting from the laughter. And he went, and then his face fell into the bowl of soup. And there was a huge round of applause. Everyone said, isn't that hilarious? And they laughed. And they laughed. And they laughed. And eventually they got weary of the joke and they said, come on, you've milked it enough now. Get up out of that bowl of soup. And one person reached and grabbed and pulled his shoulder up. The head came up. He was dead. It was not a great performance. He had choked on a fishbone because he was so greedy and he was shoveling the food down his throat. So poor Back was dead. And Tyler the Tailor panicked because Tyler the Tailor realized he had just killed the Sultan's favorite jester. And when the Sultan found out, he'd lose his head. That's not a good way to end any day. And then he decided, there is a way out. I'll pass the buck. And he picked up Tyler the Tailor picked up Back. And he walked across the street, holding him and kind of chatting away like this, as if the guy was still alive. Walked up to the doctor's door. Dr. Proctor was living across the road. There was a couple of steps leading up to Dr. Proctor's house. They came up the steps. He put Back's body against the door and was about to knock on the door when Back fell backwards. And the door swung open. And the tailor just got out of there. He vamoosed. And the doctor heard the noise of his door opening, and he ran down the stairs, and he tripped over Back, tumbled down the stairs and landed in the street, and the body of the jester tumbled down the stairs and landed on top of him. And the doctor, Dr. Proctor, he pushed the body up and he saw Back, and he said, Back. But Back didn't back. Back was past backing back, because Back was dead. And Dr. Proctor panicked. He thought, I've accidentally knocked him down my stairs and broken his neck or broken his back, and I've killed the Sultan's favorite jester. When the Sultan hears, it's off with my head. And that's not a good way to end any day. And then he thought, unless I pass the buck. So he picked up the body and he's walked across the road back towards the tailor. He didn't realize that the tailor was the man responsible for all these woes. He passed the tailor's house. He came to the corner house. The house owned by Ali Baba the thief. Climbed up the drain pipe, dragging the body with him. Not easy. He got onto the roof. He stumbled across the roof. He got to the top of the roof. And he sat back on the chimney. Both legs into the chimney, then shoved. Now downstairs, Ali Baba was counting the day's takings. One for me and one for me. One for me and one for me. Oh, yes. No honor among thieves was all going to Ali Baba. He was counting all the money and he heard a strange noise on the roof. And then he heard a whoosh as something came down the chimney. And then he saw the legs appearing. And his first thought was Santa Claus. His second thought was, hang on a second, and 2,000 years too early for that. It's a burglar. And he grabbed an axe that was lying nearby. And he flung the axe across the room towards the chimney. And the axe flew through the air. And just as Backpack fell into the fireplace, the axe hit him straight between the eyes, and it cleaved his skull from forehead down to neck. And the two halves fell apart like this, like a flower unfurling. Backpack lay in the fireplace. Ali Baba walked up to him, looked at him, didn't recognize him at all. He got his two ears, pushed his head back together, and suddenly knew who it was. He said, Backpack! But Backpack didn't backpack. Backpack was past backing back. Backpack was dead. Ali Baba panicked. He thought, I know it was an accident. I thought he was a burglar. But if the Sultan hears about this, it's off with my head. And that's not a good way to end any day. I'd better pass the buck. And he got a scarf. And he pushed the two bits of the head together and he tied the scarf around Backpack's forehead. And there was Backpack, kind of half back together again. And he picked him up and he walked out, chatting away. Welcome. You can sit down and take a seat. Don't take it too far. They count them at the end. So he brought Backpack out to the edge of the town, put him in a handcart and was leading him to the city gates. And when he got to the city gates, just outside the city gates, there's sort of a lean-to shelter. Well, there was 3,500 years ago in Baghdad. I haven't checked recently whether it's still there. But this lean-to shelter, the idea was if you came into the city late at night, they would let you in, security. So you could shelter there. Now, Baghdad is not like Ireland. In Ireland, it rains 367 days out of the 365 days in the year. But in Baghdad, it rarely rained, so this shelter wasn't too elaborate. In fact, often it was just used as a public convenience. So Ali Baba wheeled the dead jester out of the city, wheeled him towards the shelter, and was about to tip him out. But the body kind of flopped out a bit early and hit off the side of the shelter, and one wall fell in, and the other wall fell in, and the third wall fell in, and the fourth wall fell in, and the roof fell in, and the whole thing collapsed on the body of the jester. And Ali Baba thought, I better run out of here before anyone hears the noise. And just as he was turning, two soldiers that were passing grabbed him and they said, we've saved you. Was there anyone else in there? And Ali Baba said, thanks, lads, there was nobody else in there, I'll be off. But they grabbed him and they said, hold on a second, help us clear the rubble just to make sure there's nobody else in there. They cleared the rubble and they found a body with a tight bandage around the head. And they looked at the body, and one of the soldiers said, Backpack! But Backpack couldn't backpack because Backpack was past backing back. Backpack was dead. The soldiers turned and they said, you killed him. And Ali Baba said, I wasn't here. I was someplace else. I have an alibi. I know nothing about it. But they grabbed him and they brought him before the Grand Vizier. the judge, the magistrate, the man who wielded the axe and the sword of justice. And he heard the story. He heard that the king's jester was dead. And being a wise and a just magistrate, he decided best thing to do in a case of accidental death like this was chop Ali Baba's head off. And he got his axe and he was about to chop Ali Baba's head off. They were in the main square. The entire town was looking on because executions were a public spectacle in those days. And he lifted up the axe. It's like Rory McIlroy about to win the Masters. Except the blow would be a little bit higher and a little bit more devastating. Anyway, he was about to bring the axe down when Dr. Proctor got a rare attack of conscience. He said, "Stop! Ali Baba did not kill Backpack. I killed Backpack. It was an accident. He came to my surgery for help. I tripped over him and accidentally kicked him down the stairs and killed him. It was a pure accident. It was not my fault, but it was also not Ali Baba's fault." And the magistrate heard the story, and being a wise and a just magistrate, decided the best solution was he would chop both their heads off. And he lined them up and he thought, 2 in 1 go. Let's see, can I do it? Let's see, can I do it? And he was about to bring the axe down on both their necks when Tyler the tailor got a rare attack of conscience. And Tyler the tailor said, "It was my fault. Dr. Proctor did not kill the king's jester. I killed the king's jester. It was an accident. He came to my house to eat with us. He choked on a fishbone." And everyone nodded wisely because they all knew his manners and they knew that was very likely to have happened. And I accidentally killed him and I panicked. And the magistrate, being a wise and a just magistrate, listened to the story, realized it was a comical series of accidents, and decided the best solution was to chop 3 heads off. And he lined the 3 men up: Ali Baba, Dr. Proctor, Taylor the Tyler. Sorry, Tyler the tailor. I told you I wouldn't mention Taylor the Tyler anymore. He picked up the axe, 3 in 1 go to be a personal record. And he was about to bring the axe crashing down on the 3 necks when there was a disturbance at the side of the main square and everyone turned and looked. The Sultan was on his walk through the city. He did it every day around this time. And as he was walking through the city, he saw the commotion. He saw a public execution. He wasn't expecting an execution today. There were none planned. He walked over. He said, "What's happening?" The magistrate puffed up his chest and said, "Your Majesty, these 3 men murdered your jester, and I am going to give you justice by chopping the 3 heads off in 1 go." Well, the king said, "Before you do that, tell me the story." There was tears running down his eyes. He loved Backpack. So he listened to the story. He listened to how Backpack had choked on a fishbone, how Backpack had then tripped down the doctor's stairs, about how Backpack had fallen down the chimney and got his head cleaved in half by a flying axe, and how finally he fell into the public convenience just outside the city. And as he listened, one eye had tears streaming down it, tears of sadness. The other eye had tears of laughter. And he was half laughing at the story, half crying at the loss of a friend. And in the end, he wiped away both tears and he said, "Today we have lost one of the great men of our city. It's a tragedy, and it's a hilarious tragedy. We all know Backpack. We all know his love of jokes. If Backpack had to pick a way to go, this is how he would have done it. And I'll tell you one thing," he said. "You see the Grand Vizier there, the magistrate. In 100 years' time, nobody will remember his name. He said, you see me in 1,000 years' time, nobody will remember my name. In 1,000 years' time, people will still be talking about Backpack and his last great joke. So instead of executing anyone, we will declare this a day of public celebration in Backpack's memory." And the whole town erupted in applause, and they celebrated Backpack that day. But the king, the Sultan, was wrong. He said that in 1,000 years' time, his memory will be gone, and he's right. I don't know who he was. I'm telling the story. He said in 1,000 years' time, we would still remember Backpack. Well, guys, it was 3,500 years ago, and we still remember Backpack. So I think that's immortality of a type. And guys, 3,500 years later, we're still laughing at his great jest. So that's the story of Backpack, the King's Jester. Now, I told you that I collect stories from a number of sources. Some I steal from other storytellers. I only do it with their permission, so it's all right. Some I take from the National Archives, and some I get from other countries and other cultures. So, where did those stories come from? Story of Larry and the Hat came from an Irish storyteller, Eamon Kelly, a well-known Shanachie, which is our word for traditional storyteller. It was often on television when I was growing up. He had a show called In My Father's Time, and he told and preserved the old stories. The story of the hat was his. The story of Larry and the sandwich came from a traditional storyteller that nobody has ever heard of, from County Limerick, Daithí O'Connell. As a young man, I listened to Daithí and loved him, and that story is a tribute to Daithí. The story about the leprechauns comes from the Irish National Archives, and the only thing I changed, I added the cheese and onion crisps. And finally, the story of Backpack, you will find that in the National Archives in Baghdad. I'm going to end on a short story that comes from Grimm's Fairy Tales. Grimm's Fairy Tales, you all grew up with that, didn't you? Grimm's Fairy Tales were collected by two brothers, Jacob and William Grimm. They used to go all around Germany, turning down the heat in old people's homes until the old people told them the stories. And they had one story called Hands in Love. And I read Hands in Love, and I said, that's only the bones, that's the skeleton. If somebody fleshes this out, there's a great story there. So I hope you agree. This is a story and more young people. If you're in the audience and you want to shout out in response, feel free to. This is the story of a young man called Zebediah Snotnose. Let me tell you about Zebediah Snotnose. He was tall and handsome. Oh, he was taller than that. He was about that height. He had a small crooked nose, and he had 3 hairs coming out of this nose, out of this ear, 2 hairs coming out of this ear, 1 green tooth, 1 black tooth, and an orange tooth. Does that sound handsome? Anyway, he fell in love with the most beautiful girl in the area. Her name was Bindi Bandylegs. And he decided he was going to marry Bindi Bandylegs. Now, if you decide you're going to marry somebody, what's the first thing you have to do? You have to meet them, you have to go on a date. I can't just walk up to a random stranger and say, do you want to marry me? I mean, she might think I smell like cabbage. She might already have a boyfriend. You need to get to know somebody. And that is what he decided to do. He would get to know Bindi Bandylegs. He'd go on a date. One day he was leaving his house. His mother said, where are you off to? He said, I'm off to visit Bindi Bandylegs, off through the woods. He knocked on the door. She opened the door. Hello, Zebediah Snotnose. Have you brought me a... Now, if this room was full of people, they would shout it back to me. A present! So I'm going to be the audience. Have you brought me a present? Oh, silly me, said Zebediah. I forgot, but maybe you have one for me. Did she have a present for him? She did. She had a lovely present for him. She had a lovely, sharp, shiny needle. And he looked at the needle, and he picked it up, and he was walking home, and he got tired of holding the heavy needle. And finally, he stuck it in a haystack. He said, I don't remember where that was. He got home to his mother. His mother said, Zebediah, did Bindi Bandylegs give you a present? She did. She gave me a sharp, shiny needle. But I lost it. But his mother wasn't happy. His mother looked at him like this. Her face turned purple. Steam came out of her ears and all her hair fell out in a clump on the floor. She said, Zebediah Snotnose, you're a silly sausage. What are you? You're a silly sausage. Everyone knows if somebody gives you a gift of a needle, you stick it in your sleeve and you walk home. Keep it safe. He said, I'll remember tomorrow. The next day he left the house. Where are you off to? Off to visit Bindi Bandylegs. Knocked on the door. Hello, Zebediah Snotnose. Have you brought me a present? Silly me, I forgot. but maybe you have one for me. Do you think she had a present for him? Oh, she did. She had a lovely, sharp, shiny knife. And he looked at the big, sharp, shiny knife. He remembered his mother's words, and he stuck the knife in his sleeve, and he nearly chopped his hand off. Blood spurting every place, and he slipped in it on his pillow. And he went home, and he said, ow, ow, ow. His mum saw. She said, you silly sausage! Everyone knows if somebody gives you a present of a knife, you put it in your pocket to keep it safe. Silly me, he said, I'll remember. The next day he left the house. Where are you off to? Off to visit Bindy Bandy Legs. Knock, knock, knock. Hello, Zebediah Snot-Nose. Have you brought me a present? Silly me. I forgot, but maybe you have one for me. Did she have a present for him? She did. She had a lovely, big, dirty, hairy, smelly billy goat with a little snake of a beard, small tail, big horns. And he looked at the billy goat, and he remembered his mother's advice, and he stuffed the billy goat in his pocket, and he walked home like this, because it's not easy to walk with a billy goat in your pocket. Well, when he got home, poor goat had smothered. His mother looked at him and said, you silly sausage! Everyone knows if somebody gives you a billy goat, you tie a rope around the billy goat's neck and you lead him home. He said, I'll remember. The next day he left the house. Where are you off to? Off to visit Billy Bandy Legs. Knock, knock, knock. Hello, Zebediah. Have you brought me a present? Ooh. Silly me, I forgot. But maybe you have one for me. Well, did she have a present for him? She did. She had a lovely, huge, ginormous plate of sausages. 716 sausages, enough to last him all day. And he remembered his mother's advice, and he tied a string around the top sausage. And he walked home and he dragged the sausage along the ground behind him. And a little dog about your size followed him home and ate every last sausage. He got home, all he had was a string and a fat dog. And his mother said, you silly sausage! Everyone knows if somebody gives you a present of a plate of sausages, you balance them on your head and you walk home carefully. I'll remember tomorrow. The next day he left the house. Where are you off to? Off to visit Bindy Bandy Legs. Knock, knock, knock. Hello, Zebediah Snot-Nose. Have you brought me a present? Oh, silly me, I forgot. But maybe you have one for me. Well, she did have a present for him. She had a lovely, big, shiny, pink pig. Big, round pig with a little snout at one end and a curly-whirly tail at the other end. And he remembered his mother's advice, and he picked up the pig. And he balanced the pig on his head and walked home like this with the pig balanced on his head. And whatever way he moved, and he accidentally kicked the pig, and the pig began to squirm. And he accidentally kicked the pig a bit more, and the pig began to squirm a bit more. And finally, the pig kicked him in the nose and broke his nose. He came home to his mom and he said, Mom, my nose is all broken. She said, you silly sausage! Everyone knows if somebody gives you a present of a pig, you tie a rope around its neck, you lead it home and you feed it. Now, normally the audience would shout out suggestions, so I'm going to throw in the most common suggestion. Some rashers, some mud, some carrots, some straw. Well, he said, I'll remember tomorrow. Next day he left the house. Where are you off to? Said his mum. Off to visit Bindy Bandy Legs through the wood. Knock, knock. Hello, have you brought me a present? Oh, silly me, I forgot. But maybe you have one for me. Did she have a present for him? She run out of presents. She said, I am very sorry, Zebediah. I have no gift to give you. But I tell you what, I'll be your gift. Do you think he was happy? He was so happy he jumped for joy. He jumped so high, his head hit off the roof. He ended up with a lump the size of a grapefruit. And then he remembered his mother's words. And he ran over to Bindy Bandy Legs. And instead of throwing his arms out and giving her a warm hug, he tied a rope around her neck and led her home and tied her in the stable and fed her some bacon. and some straw, and some mud, and some carrots. Now, would you do that to your girlfriend, or would you accept that behaviour of your boyfriend? Of course not. Bindi Bandy Legs was furious. She ripped the rope off her neck. She ripped it in like this. Steam came out of her ears, her face turned purple, and she bellowed, "You silly sausage! I'll never marry you now." And she didn't. In fairness, she ran off and she married somebody else. She married a guy called Johnny Pinky Stews. And she became Bindi Bandy Legs Pinky Stews. And they lived happily ever after, except for one small problem. Everyone got his name wrong and called him Johnny Stinky Boos. And for the rest of her life, she became known as Bindi Stinky Boos. And as for my friend Zebediah Snotnose, he's still living all on his own with his mum. I'm sorry to end on a downer, but when I heard that story for the first time, I cried so much my socks got wet. So guys, that story comes from the collection of the Grimm brothers, so I suppose it's part of the German National Archives. I quote you a story from the Baghdad National Archives, and the Irish National Archives. There's been none of me in the past, however long I've been up here, but I really enjoyed telling for you. I hope you enjoyed listening. And guys, from wonderful Marrakesh to you, I really hope you have a wonderful evening. I'm just going to ask, does Omar, do you want to tell? You good? Guys, it has been absolutely fantastic. So as I said, from sunny here to rainy there. Thank you so much for listening and have a wonderful evening, everyone.
And thank you very much, Tony.
It was a
And
pleasure.
on the cafe, not in the cafe live as Tony has been, but in about 50 minutes time at 6 o'clock, we'll be to spin at Ario doing stories for children. So, and then tomorrow morning at 10 o'clock in the morning, we've got a worldwide story round. So the people in Australia and the Far East can, with their the timing and clocks and things, can join us. Meanwhile, a round of applause for Tony Garvin Healy and his brilliant self.
Thank you, guys. It was a pleasure.
I managed to get the time wrong, Tony, and missed it completely. I thought you were on at 5.
Yes, I can't even see the time, but I gather I went over the hours. So sorry about that. But you got a little bit of it. It's good to see you again.
I'll watch it on catch up. Don't worry. Good to see you.
And you can watch it on double speed. It's probably better.
Come back at 6 and see the spinner.
Come back at 6 for the spinner. Tony's a lot prettier than the spinner, but never mind that.
See you. Bye.
Take care, man. Catch you later. Guys. Enjoy your time in Marrakesh. Enjoy your time.
Loving it.
Bye.